Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And I'm very excited to welcome a guest on the show today. Simon Olsen is joining us from Deloitte, and I'm really excited to have him join us to talk about his leadership journey, what he's learned along the way, and also his lessons from working across many different cultures in his business career. So, Simon, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you, Victoria, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So, by way of introduction, Simon Olsen, I'm a partner at Deloitte in London. I've been at Deloitte for 26 years. So, in terms of organisation, very little career imagination. But in those 26 years, I've done an awful lot. For the last 23 years, I've been in what we call equity capital markets, which means I take companies onto the public market, predominantly the London Stock Exchange, but I've also done IPOs onto 19 other different global exchanges. And then we've also worked with companies that are listed when they're doing transactions. I think
It's
particular
fantastic.
context, a particular context for today, I've been very lucky to work with a lot of overseas businesses doing IPOs and done that across the world. So I've experienced many different cultures, and it's been one of the most rewarding parts of my job actually has been working with many different businesses and many different people, taking them through that journey to be public.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I really appreciate also the cultural context, the global context as well, because that's really interesting also to the people who are listening to the show as well. So I'm going to, that's a very long career. So 26 years, great experience, and really interesting as well that you've been with Deloitte through that time. So I'm really curious. You obviously at partner level now, you're very much in that very high leadership role. But what was your journey to leadership? How did you make it? Because obviously you started in that organization. Did I understand it as a graduate almost from that level there?
Yeah, so I started as a graduate, and I guess in some respects I've been lucky to have worked in a big firm such as Deloitte, where you have a program of development and also in some respects an expectation that people will develop and progress in their careers. So there's been some specific training, and that's been very helpful. But I think more than anything, progression to leadership has actually come from a mixture of experience and being willing to put yourself in the deep end and try and experiment and find out what works for you as a leader. And I've been very lucky to progress through that. I think the other thing I would say to anyone about leadership is a lot of it is determination, bravery, frankly. Being bold, being able to make decisions, being able to set strategy, being able to have that vision, and critically, team. Because I think one of the most rewarding parts of leadership is building the team around you, having a team of great people. And I think it was Ronald Reagan always said, try and get people around you who are more clever and more smart than you are. So I've always had a mission to have a really good team around me who I can rely on. But most importantly, then watching that team develop as a leader is fantastic.
Wow, there's so much in there that I want to kind of dive into. And I love the way that you've also talked about, acknowledged obviously the great training you've had, the great experiences you've had. But you said something very interesting there. You talked about this kind of boldness and being brave. And that really talks to, I suppose, an attitude and determination was another word you used there. So it sounds like it's really very much about a sort of mindset and a set of attitudes that really has defined how you think about leadership.
Yeah, and I think as a leader, you've got to think big to achieve big. If you
Mhm.
think small, you'll only ever achieve small. So it's very unusual for you to over exceed what you're seeking to achieve. And in that context, therefore, I think if you are bold, you are brave, you're willing to do things you've not done before, you're willing to dive into the deep end, you're willing to stand up in front of hundreds or thousands of people and speak, you're willing to go to difficult meetings, you're willing to put yourself out there. Actually, you become experienced at it, become better at it, and almost naturally become a leader. But sometimes taking those first steps, doing things for the first time, does require a bravery and a boldness. And I think for many, you almost get into the sort of imposter syndrome where you think, well, it's not me, I can't do that, I'll be found out. And actually having the confidence to say, no, that can be me.
Mm.
If I
I
push,
love that.
it can be me. So having that real boldness to go out there and do it.
I really like that because I think what you're saying here, and I think this is true as well, which is, the first time you do something, it doesn't feel easy, but it's through that repetition, through that sort of muscle memory, building up the reps effectively, you get better at that, and then you build the confidence. And I have a real sort of mantra, which is practice makes confidence. Even if whatever you're doing is stretching you way beyond your comfort zone, you can really make that happen through the repetition. So that's what I'm hearing. But I'm really curious for you, particularly. Obviously, there was that first time of speaking in front of thousands or doing the thing which really stretched you. So, how do you lean into being bolder when it really is out of your comfort zone, when it really is moving you past the usual parameters?
I think you have to back yourself, of course, but also seek advice from mentors, people who've been there before or done something similar. I mean, I can remember one of the first big speeches I had to do in front of an audience. I was feeling very nervous. And I went and talked to a mentor and said, "Look, I'm feeling really nervous." And this individual I always thought was a phenomenal speaker. And he turned to me and said, "Oh, I still feel really nervous every time I speak. But all I've really done is just learn to channel that nervousness into a positive energy, which I then use to speak." And bizarrely for me, the fact that someone that seniority and that gravitas said to me, "I feel nervous," I thought, oh, so I'm normal. It's okay. And in that speech, I was able to channel it. And ever since, I've not had nerves in the same way. I felt nervous, but I'm able to channel it accordingly. So I think always seek guidance. There will be people who have done something either the same or similar who will be able to help you.
Mm.
And practice. I would say practice as well, especially when you're doing things for the first time. Do practice. I think as I've got more senior at Deloitte, I spend more time practicing for speeches, for presentations, even big meetings, and perhaps I used to because I want to get spot on when I'm performing.
I really appreciate that openness, actually, because I think it's sometimes you talked about the example of your mentor, but also what you do right now is best practice. And I think sometimes people look at leaders and think, well, it looks so effortless. It looks so natural to them that they just turn up and do this and they're able to do it. But I love the way that you've described your own journey on that, but also it's not done. There's always something to continue to develop, to continue to get the support on, but also to practice and make sure you're really good at that. You're always developing that skill, right?
Yeah, that's right. And also I've seen videos and examples of actually some really famous people who are exactly how you describe it. You think they just get up on a stage or get up in front of a big team meeting or whatever occasion and just automatically are able to talk very coherently with a huge amount of gravitas. In practice, they would have done a lot of preparation, but they will also, over their career, have got better. So there's some interesting examples of, I think it's Barack Obama. If you look at him in his early days as a politician versus how he was as president, you can see a real progression actually. Many people look at him as he was as president and think, wow, amazing orator. He must have been born with those skill sets. But if you look at him in his early days, you can see he wasn't. So it's practice, training, experience.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well. And I think, I'm very much of the philosophy that you're not born with these skills. People develop them over time. It's about where you put intentionally your focus and where you choose to kind of develop your skill sets, and through the iteration process build the confidence this way. That's, for me, really, really critical. So thank you for sharing that very honestly, because I think that will be very important for some of the listeners to hear today, that it's not inherent, it's not just a born talent. And you also mentioned the importance of mentors to you. So specifically that point in your journey. But what role does mentoring or being mentored play in your leadership today?
I think it's hugely important, both in terms of, for me personally, still needing well, and wanting mentorship, both from, in my case, senior partners or more senior partners at Deloitte, but also from people external to Deloitte. Some of my strongest mentors throughout my career actually have come from outside of Deloitte as well as inside. And then I think as a leader, you cannot underestimate the importance of mentoring and supporting the team beneath you. I mean, that is absolutely critical. And I would draw a distinction here between the sort of maybe more formal appraisal type of process, which is needed. But actually, I think the more informal and ongoing mentoring of people, to their very individual context is hugely important. And one of the hardest things I think I've had to learn as a leader is adjusting my style and adjusting my mentorship approach to all the different individuals that you work with over your career. No two people are the same. And actually adjusting your style as a mentor and also as a leader for those people is hugely important and can be very, very rewarding when you get it right. You can see people really start to flourish and develop quickly and powerfully when you get it right.
I can imagine. And it must be a very rewarding experience to see how people grow. But also, I know myself from the mentoring that I do that actually you get, I mean, I receive a lot back from it as well, from those conversations, like learning what the questions are, what people are at different stages of their career, either challenged by or struggling with, or what it is that's really top of mind for them, right?
No, completely. And I think you also have to remember that for a lot of senior people in business or other walks of life, it's not just work quite often. There isn't normally that much of a distinction between work and life for many people. You just have a life of which work is a component part and quite a major component part already. But it's actually the balance across the whole thing. So for many people I mentor, quite often their challenges or the things at the top of their mind actually aren't anything to do with work at all. They're to do with their personal life or the interaction between the two. So that's why I say when you mentor people properly, you have to really get to know them, to really understand what drives them, but also the context in which their personal life and work life interact and how you can make that work for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting point, right? Because that balance, that blend, I mean, it's not, I don't actually think about it as balance. I think about it as a blend because that will change over time, even from week to week for me sometimes and days. But that's very personal and very unique. But I'm really curious because sometimes I think some of the fears that go with becoming a senior leader is, but how do I then make space for everything else in my life? How do I blend it in a way? And I hope you don't mind me asking a very personal question, but I know you have a family. How do you make that work for you? How do you make those different threads of your life come together and work?
Yeah, I think you have to focus on prioritization and recognize that urgent things at work aren't necessarily always the priority. Sometimes you'll have priorities in your personal life that have to come through, and it could be family, it may even be friends. So you have to prioritize and recognize that the right team around you as a leader is key to enable you to do that. If you get the team right, that should create you enough time both to be a leader and to have that ability to prioritize personal aspects of your life when needed. And then I think you just have to be disciplined as well sometimes. Yes, senior people in business will have urgent things that require them to work evenings, weekends sometimes. But that's what we're paid for. That's what we do. But at the same time, you have to be disciplined. Sometimes it is okay to turn your phone off in the evening. When I go on holiday, for example, twice a year, I'm very strict at pretty much no communication, phone off, laptop off. Yes, of course, people can get me in an emergency, but I make it quite clear to everyone that's the case. So I think there is a discipline and a prioritization that goes into that. But I would actually come back to, for a leader, if you get the team right beneath you,
Mm.
that's the thing that creates the time. Because the thing
Mm.
that's most valuable and you're most short of is time.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And I love the way that you think about it. It's not about one way of doing it, but actually also about the moments when you are fully off, the discipline, having the boundaries around what is important to you. And that's, of course, very individual. So the personal choice to do that. I just want to come back to something you said earlier, which I found very interesting. You talked about adapting your mentoring style and as part of that, adapting your leadership style. And of course, that is a really important part of being a successful leader, seeing the people who you're working with, understanding them as individuals and their expectations of you, and how you can bring the best out for them as well. And I'm really curious as well in the context, particularly of you talked about your international experience and working across many different cultures, how you've adapted yourself for different environments and different situations. Perhaps could talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in terms of adapting for mentoring, I always think the most important thing is to listen to people. It can be very easy sometimes to feel like you should just tell people what to do because you think you can observe from what you've seen and then just be telling them what to do because you think from your experience you know the answer for them. So it's critical to actually listen to individuals, force yourself to listen. In my case, I'm not naturally very good at it sometimes. You have to force yourself to listen to where they're at, what they're worried about, the context, what's happening in their life, what's worrying them, why it's worrying them, and just prompt with questions to get more. And only then, once you've really listened and understood, can you then guide them to the solution. But quite often, people will get there themselves if you listen. They'll talk to you about their problems and often have the solution in mind. So I would say listening for context is very important. And then when it comes to different cultures, as I said at the start, I've been very lucky to work with companies and people from all around the world. And in my case, in some of the more, let's say, exotic parts of the world where many people probably won't have done business. So you meet people, from developing countries where their experience, sometimes education, but certainly culture is very different to what we're used to in Europe or the US. So that listening becomes ever more important because you have to understand the context more. In terms of when I'm doing business overseas in different cultures, I think it's important to make sure you understand enough about the culture you're going into. And this would include in the context of mentoring, but I think it applies more broadly to doing business in different countries. You don't always have to be expert in that country. I think for me, typically we're working with companies for a number of months or maybe at most a couple of years on a project. So we're not necessarily fully embedding ourselves in that country in the same way that someone who's moving to work permanently in a country would. I think you need to understand enough, but more importantly, then you know, apply it. And again, feel free to be bold. I've always found the companies I work with really respect you if you're trying to adapt to their culture and trying to do things in the right way. Even if you make a complete mess of it sometimes, that doesn't actually matter in my experience. They really respect for the fact that you're trying. You're not the arrogant European or American coming into a culture in, say, Africa or Asia and just expecting the people in the room to adapt to you and change to you. You're coming in showing them a lot of respect by understanding their culture. I always try and learn a few words, try and understand, especially in business meetings, how you're supposed to conduct yourself. Are there any particular things you should or shouldn't do? For example, in a lot of Asian countries, people will give you a business card held in two hands. You need to take it in two hands and read it. If you do
Mm,
anything different, that's seen as insulting. Whereas obviously from a British or European or American perspective, you're used to say, okay, thanks for the card, put it in your pocket. You don't read it because you've met the
mm,
individual. So little things like that, but then down to simple things like go out for dinner with your client or if you're mentoring someone with that individual and experience the local cuisine. Get to see where you're going, get to visit places, try and learn some of the language.
mm.
But I repeat, you don't necessarily need to be expert, but try and understand as much as you can. And when you're there, try and put it into practice because you'll soon
Yeah.
get better. And if people see you trying, they'll generally actually help. I've had some really senior, even CEOs at big companies see me trying to put the culture into practice and just quietly helping me and guiding me in doing so, which is fantastic because that's how you learn.
That's fantastic. And I love how, I really thank you so much for giving very practical examples there. And what is interesting from what I'm hearing is this is not about grand gestures, but it's about the nuances of how you meet somebody, the nuances of how you share food, which of course is such a cultural part of getting to know each other in many cultures. And so I'm curious, like, how have you built up that knowledge? Is it something you read about? Have you taken training, or how do you kind of build cultural knowledge before you say interact with a new culture, maybe that you're not so familiar with?
Yes, I'll try and do a number of things. I'll try and spend some time reading about the culture. There's plenty of opportunities to do that online these days. It's easier than it used to be. But I've found in some respects, reading about it, the theory of it, has a limit because
Mm.
what you really need is practical advice in a lot of cases. So,
Mm.
for example, when I was in Japan recently, you can read a lot about how the hierarchical system works, how should conduct yourself in meetings, when you can speak, when you can't speak, all of this kind of stuff. You can read about that, but I found it much more powerful to speak to somebody who's Japanese in that case. And I'm
Yes.
lucky in Deloitte, we have people from a lot of different nationalities. But I would say for most people, you can probably find someone to talk to and
Mm.
just ask them and have them show you. You when I've been in Ghana, for example, there's a particular handshake that the Ghanaians do with each other, which I had my Ghanaian colleague in London teach me how to do. Yeah, and then when I was in Ghana, they were very impressed that I knew how to do that handshake. There's other things like that, which you probably actually can't read about.
Mm.
That's not really what the books will tell you to do in terms of how to conduct your business. But if you think if when you're meeting someone for the first time, if you greet them the correct way for their nationality, they're very impressed by that.
Yeah. And even learning a few words, I think that's also so critical. You don't have to be fluent, right? It's just about saying hello in that language. And I love the way that you really differentiate between theory and actual application, because I think there is a lot of theory out there. And, sometimes there are fantastic books are on the topic, amazing research that backs up that theory and the books. But that's why I'm really passionate about cultural intelligence, which is about applying it, like putting together, okay, strategies like I'm going to go talk to somebody who can show me the handshake, and then I'm going to actually put it into practice. But I hear the link here for you between this and also being bold, which is you've got to try, you've got to have a go and know you may not get it right, but at least you're trying. And that's really valued by others. That's what I'm hearing here, this link between the two.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that being seen to try, being seen to apply their culture goes down really well all the time. And that applies both to informal business contexts and informal business contexts, also to when you're looking after your own team who maybe are on the ground in the particular country. To be seen to be trying is the main thing. And therefore, if
Mm.
you've done some reading, which is always good, I think, to warm up, then I would always say just be bold, get on with it, get to the country.
Yeah.
And maybe, for example, for me, if I've got big client meetings, I might arrive slightly early, have the local team, my local Deloitte team, take me out, show me the town, teach me how to act. It's
Mm.
actually much easier than the next day, I would say, when I'm in a big client meeting, because I've already got some experience with the country, assuming I'm going there for the
Mm.
first time. But yeah, you can't, I'd agree with you, you cannot be practical. You will learn so much as a leader about how to do business in a country and the culture of the country. And the two things are always linked, just by being there. And you'll pick up the language as well. You pick up the language very quickly.
Yeah. And I hear from that's also about allowing enough space and time in your agenda to do this, right? Because the temptation would be to fly in direct for the client meeting and then just fly out directly afterwards. But actually, it sounds like what you're doing successfully is creating the space and time to have that time with your team locally, with the client, of course, but for things like the food, for the connection, which actually, of course, is sometimes where business actually really happens, right? In these kind of more informal moments where the trust really is built.
Yeah, that's right. And in particular, in quite a number of parts of the world, the proper business is actually conducted largely in the informal
Mm.
settings, and then the formal settings are just to formalize what's been agreed informally. So again, you need to understand that in advance about a culture, because to your point, there's no there's no point just flying straight in for a meeting and flying straight out again if in reality the business is going to be done either side of it.
Mm.
So you need to understand that in advance. But yes, I would always try, it doesn't always work out, I would always try to manage the diary so as to be able to spend a little time immersing in a country when I'm going there for the first time.
Yeah, understood. Amazing. Well, shifting from this topic, I want to come to just where we are with the current moment in time when we're recording this. So, summer 2025. And clearly, there's been a lot going on in the world recently, a lot geopolitically. There's a lot of technical and AI sort of changes going on in the world. So, I'm really curious, just from the point of view of leadership and how you feel you are a leader now and where you see it kind of going in the future. Like, what's changing around you? What do you see coming up?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. AI is definitely going to have a huge impact on not only the business I'm in, but many of the companies I deal with. I think with as with any technological evolution, the impact of AI will change what we're doing clearly, and I think it will change the nature of what people do. You see a lot of concern in the press and otherwise around, oh, we're going to have mass unemployment because AI is going to take away all the jobs. I think history shows us that when technological evolution happens, what people do changes, but we still need people. Where we've used AI tools now to help our clients, for example, we still need our people, but they're doing different things. So rather than the AI does what they used to do, you still need to train the AI on what to do. You need to give the AI the context of what it's doing, for example. So I think the nature of what people do is going to change. And as a leader, not only therefore with AI, are you looking at what's going to happen to my business? What changes do I need to make to my business? How am I going to stay on the front foot? I've also got to think about what does that mean for my people? Because they will be concerned. It's okay for me to sit here saying, no, it'll be okay. You'll just be doing something slightly different. But for a lot of people, they say, well, what's different going to look like? So you need to be reassuring them and helping them through this and thinking about, okay, what training are people going to need? What new skill sets are they going to need? So I think it's going to be a very exciting time as regards AI and technology more broadly. But you need to remember as a leader the impact that has on the people in your organization. And then in terms of, there's a lot going on geopolitically around the world.
Yes.
So again, that can be unsettling for your teams. So I think you have to remember that as a leader that they need the support and guidance. You need to help them understand what's going on and then think through what it means for your business and what you're doing. And especially in today's world, we're seeing you need to be able to do that very quickly.
Mhm.
A lot of the change, the sort of time period of change and the time period in which you have to react to geopolitical matters is getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I can imagine also, one of the things that I've also come across and been very aware of is that individuals who, in very diverse multicultural teams in one location, they may be personally impacted, their family may be impacted by some of the geopolitical movements and things going on. So, I'm very aware that for leaders, it's also that nuance of really understanding who needs more support in this time, who needs perhaps even space to really be able to process what's going on that might be impacting their work life as well. So yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that's very thoughtful. I think, it's very interesting. I think I think on the AI side as well, it's quite hard sometimes as a leader, and I'm having conversations with leaders about this all the time, that sometimes you don't know what the answer is. And your team are looking to you for certainty and direction when sometimes that direction isn't fully worked out. And I think that's a really interesting space to be in.
Agreed, and especially when in reality the team probably know, or certain members of the team probably know more than I do about the impact of AI, or indeed the opportunities from
Yeah.
AI. When I grew up, I didn't have a mobile phone until I was in my early 20s. So it's ironic that the people who look to you for the leadership, and you're right, they do look
Mm.
to you for that leadership, actually probably have the best ideas. So in some respects, one of my goals is to actually have the really bright people in my team think about the solutions and then help come up with our strategy accordingly. Because I mean, in the world I operate in, then no doubt AI will have a big impact in the coming decade. There's no question about that.
Mm.
And you're right about the impact on different cultures from what's going on geopolitically. I think that for organizations can be very challenging, especially, for example, where you have um, two countries at war. And
Yes.
we certainly in our organization will have people who are nationals of both sides of that conflict.
Mm.
So that can be very difficult to manage, and you have to really respect people's concerns and worries about that. Oftentimes they will have people on the ground in those countries who are close family members, for example.
Mm.
And then so you have those two countries in conflict, but then you have the people working side by side,
Yeah.
the same office. So that can take some understanding and managing.
Absolutely. And then there is certainly no easy answer to that, but I'm very aware that leaders I'm talking to as well often see that as the need for extra care and extra attention to team at these moments in time, and recognizing impacts to how people perhaps are able to work, able to lean into work when other things like this are going on in their worlds.
Yeah, and I think it's important to do that at two levels. So I think for an organization, you need to be sending out the right tone from the top around geopolitical events. Very unlikely taking sides. I think that's not the role of business generally to do that. So you need to be very balanced in your communication, set the tone from the top right. You then need, as leaders, to actually then invest in individuals, because the tone from the top is one thing, but you need to then invest in individuals and make that a reality day by day for people in your team.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing on that. I think that's a really very important point. As we're coming towards the end of today's episode, I can imagine that many listeners are tuning in and thinking, wow, this is not only incredibly insightful and helpful, but it's really very inspiring to hear about your own journey, to hear about what you've learned along the way, but also what you still work on as a leader as well. So, we have people who are listening at very different stages of their careers. Some of them are senior managers already, some are middle career, really aspiring to make it to senior leadership. And we even have people right at the start of their career who are coming out of MBA programs and master's programs. So I suppose, I'm really curious whether you have any sort of final wisdom, final tips and advice to those people as they think about how they progress their careers, whatever that looks like to their personal context. How can people step into their leadership and really be the best version of themselves? I'm really kind of interested to get your final thoughts on that.
No, for sure. I would definitely go back to be bold and be brave. I would also say look at people above you. Look at leaders you recognize and think are good. And then from that portfolio, take the good things, so the things they do well, and try and emulate that. And then look at the things you think they don't do well and try and not do that. And therefore build yourself to be a leader by taking all the good things from all the people around you and acknowledging the bad things, because no one's perfect,
Mm.
and trying to avoid those. And I think in yourself as well, recognize what you're good at and play to your strengths. And also then recognize what you're not good at and either become better at it, or maybe the answer is you build a team around you so that whatever it is you're not so good at, you actually then don't have to do.
Mm.
So I would then also say, cannot underestimate the power of getting your team right. So invest in getting the right team around you. That is what will make you good. If you don't have the right team around you, you are inherently limited in how far you will progress as a leader. The the last thing I would say is be wary of imposter syndrome. So lots of people I talk to, and indeed me as well throughout my career, you have moments where you think, well, that's just not me. I'm not good enough for this. And for whatever reason, you may be thinking that that's not me. I'm not good enough. I can't do that. I'll never be the person who can stand up in front of 1,000 people. I'll never be the person who can lead a team of thousands of people in, etc., etc., etc. Just be aware of that. And as we were saying earlier, have the confidence that that can be you, because it has to be someone. And the people who you look up to and think, oh, I couldn't be that person, they were where you are. They were once there. So everybody can do it. But as with anything in life, when it comes to career and what you want to be in business and indeed what you want to be in your personal life, there's no right answer. And this is something I talk to a lot of my mentees about. There is no right answer in terms of what you want to be in life. That's up to you.
Mm.
So I've mentored plenty of people, some of whom have become hugely successful in business, but others actually who have become reasonably successful, but then very satisfied with where they are in terms of work, but have wanted to pursue and be a leader or be very active in other areas of their life outside of work. And that's really good. And some of them have been very successful outside of work. So there's no right answer. You have to figure out your right answer and then be bold and brave to achieve what you want to.
Simon, that's amazing. Thank you so much for wrapping that up really succinctly. And I love the way that you've talked about that being a choice. You have to choose it. And almost that idea of why not you? Why couldn't it be you? Somebody is going to do that role. And really, you have to therefore actively choose to step into it. Simon, I really very much appreciate your time. This has been an amazing conversation, incredibly insightful. And I loved all the different topics that we've touched on and also the content of some of the ideas that you've brought around leadership to this conversation and cultural leadership as well. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us here on the show. If people want to sort of learn more about what you do and follow you, where would be the best place to do that? Is that LinkedIn or where would that be?
Yeah, so people can get me on LinkedIn. Just search Simon Olsen Deloitte. I'm fairly sure there's only one.
Excellent. Well, we can always put a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. But thank you so much for your this brilliant conversation. I've greatly enjoyed it. I'm sure our listeners have found it very insightful, and I very much look forward to seeing everybody on the show next time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.